We start with Senator Elizabeth Warren tweeting a list of action items that she says President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris can accomplish on day one. And at the top of the list, she's calling on the future administration to cancel billions of dollars in student loan debt. With me now is Bloomberg finance reporter Sonali Basak. Sonali, it's great to have you here. I want you to contextualize this for us. There is more than $1 trillion of outstanding student loan debt. What is Elizabeth Warren talking about here?
Right. It's actually closer to 1.7 trillion.
It keeps going up.
The reason that number matters, it makes the U.S. government one of the largest banks in America, if you think about it that way. It's quickly approaching the size of Citigroup.
Wow.
That's how much student loan we have on the government's balance sheet. But forgiving a lot of that means that this becomes a taxpayer issue as well. It's a controversial topic, but it could mean a lot for people. While they're so burdened with student debt, almost 1 in 5 defaulting on those loans. So there's a significant population in America that can't pay back their debt. In this COVID crisis especially, it's come to light and on the top of people's minds because the moratorium on student loans right now, on repayments, ends in just a couple weeks.
In her call to do this, she writes that the single most effective executive action available to provide massive consumer-driven stimulus. That stimulus term. What does this mean for a stimulus? You have hundreds of dollars more, sometimes thousands for people that they can spend somewhere else apart from on student loans.
Right. Well, there's a huge difference between deferring payments and forgiving them, right? And right now we have deferments. People are still responsible for their loans, but they don't need to pay them until next year. For what Elizabeth Warren's saying is forgiving some of these loans, meaning you don't have to pay them at all. How that's done is very complicated, right? But there's a TD Bank survey last year, for example, that shows you that 20% of the household income of people under 40 years old are using that money, 20% of their money to pay for their student loans.
Wow.
So it is a significant burden on people's financials, and forgiving it would mean a lot in terms of current and future payments.
Right. If we think about where that 20% could go, it could go to thinking about starting a family at an earlier age rather than delaying it like so many of us are doing, or buying a home instead of renting for our entire lives. What would that do to the economy if people were able to spend money there rather than on student loans?
Well, like you said, student loans are one of the biggest debt burdens behind purchasing a home for most people. So yes, getting a home, getting cars, being able to just spend money on the general economy,
which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing, but also remember something about this too is that different populations are disproportionately impacted. So actually, people who are borrowing less have a higher default rate, which shows you that people who are not necessarily going to professional schools and going to get their MBAs or becoming a doctor have higher default rates than folks that are taking on large debt burdens to then go back and participate in different parts of the economy.
You mentioned this is controversial.
Right.
And I think a big part of that is because burden will move to taxpayers rather than to the people who actually took the responsibility of taking out these loans. Explain the controversy here and what that means for whether or not this could happen.
Well, first of all, how much do you forgive? Is it $10,000? Is that the right number? Is it an amount less than that? That's a big question. Different communities are disproportionately impacted. Women are impacted more by this. People of color are impacted more by this. And younger people, obviously, are impacted much more by this. Tim, it's really important because the cost of education for young people has risen to above 35% for for-profit institution on average. That's more than triple what it was in the 70s. And so when people across the entire taxpayer base are looking at how to help the economy here, the people who are not impacted by that are maybe going to turn around and say, why am I paying for this?
Yeah, and it affects different people differently, like you said. I mean, there are doctors who are out of medical school for a few years who make more than $500,000 a year but have $200,000 still in student loan debts. Will they be forgiven at the same rate that somebody is who has an undergrad degree from a for-profit institution who isn't making that kind of money?
And you're hitting the heart of the political debate here. Whose loans are forgiven and how many of them are forgiven? How much of it is forgiven? It will impact everybody disproportionately.
What does this do for banks or for the small number of banks that actually do this, right? I know you've spoken to Anthony Noto, who's the CEO at SoFi in the past. That's one of the banks that tries to refi student loans.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, even for somebody at a for-profit institution, right? Like SoFi, they're a lender, but he wants student reform as well, student loan reform as well. Why is that? It's because they don't just offer student loans. They offer credit cards and other types of products. If their clients can't pay back their loans, they're not going to get the other products as well.
Bloomberg finance reporter Sonali Basak, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
The biggest stories the moment they happen from around the globe. Subscribe to Bloomberg Quick Take now for insight in an instant.